The afternoon sun blazed brilliantly across the suburban neighborhood of Maple Ridge, Ohio, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. It was the kind of perfect day that parents dream about, warm enough to be comfortable, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming lilac bushes. The family's backyard was a sanctuary of childhood joy, meticulously maintained by Emma's father, Michael, who took pride in creating the perfect space for his only daughter to explore and play. 4-year-old Emma sat contentedly in the sandbox her grandfather had built for her the previous summer. Her small hands worked methodically, patting down wet sand and constructing what she believed to be the most magnificent castle the world had ever seen. Her tongue poked out slightly in concentration, a habit her mother had noticed appeared whenever Emma was deeply focused on something important. She wore a pale yellow sundress with tiny white daisies printed across the fabric, and her dark curly hair was pulled back with a matching ribbon that had already begun to slip from its moorings. Emma hummed a tuneless melody as she worked, occasionally pausing to admire her creation or to inspect a particularly interesting pebble that might serve as a castle decoration. She was completely absorbed in her own miniature world, unaware of anything beyond the sandbox, her plastic bucket, and her imagination. In her mind, she wasn't just building a castle, she was creating an entire kingdom where princesses lived and adventurers sought treasure. The afternoon had been uneventful, as most weekdays were in the quiet neighborhood. A few neighbors had passed by on their walks, waving to Emma and her mother, who sat on the porch swing reading a book while keeping one eye on her daughter. The neighborhood was the kind of place where people knew their neighbors' names, where children could play outside without constant worry, and where the most dramatic thing that usually happened was someone's garden winning first place at the community fair. That peaceful normalcy was about to shatter. At precisely 3:47 p.m. the sound came first, a low, almost imperceptible whine carried on the wind. Emma paused mid-pat, her small hand still buried in the sand. She looked up, her dark eyes searching the tree line that bordered the property. The whine grew louder, transforming into an urgent, frantic sound that didn't belong in this quiet afternoon. It was the sound of an animal in distress, or perhaps something far more alarming, an animal in a state of intense alertness. Seconds later, Emma saw movement. A massive German shepherd bounded through the gap in the wooden fence that separated the property from the neighboring yards. The dog was enormous, easily weighing 90 pounds, with a sleek black and tan coat that rippled with muscle as he moved. But what struck Emma most was the dog's behavior. He wasn't playful or curious. His entire body was rigid with tension, his movements sharp and purposeful. His nostrils flared repeatedly, as if he were trying to inhale every molecule of air surrounding the property. "Oh my God, Emma, get back!" her mother suddenly called from the porch, her voice pitched with alarm. She immediately stood, the book forgotten on the swing, her maternal instincts screaming danger. But Emma wasn't frightened. Instead, she was mesmerized. The dog was beautiful in a powerful, commanding way. His dark eyes fixed on something beyond Emma's comprehension, and his entire being seemed focused on a singular, urgent mission. Then came the handler, a tall man in a dark blue uniform, his face flushed with exertion as he jogged after the dog, gripping the leather leash with both hands. "Scout heel," the man commanded, his voice sharp and professional. But Scout paid no attention to the command. Instead, the massive dog pulled his handler directly toward the property line fence, the one that separated the yard from Foster's house next door. Officer James Mitchell, 17 years into his law enforcement career, immediately recognized what was happening. Scout wasn't misbehaving or overexcited. This was textbook drug alert behavior. Every muscle in the dog's body screamed it. Every whine, every frantic sniff, every rigid stance, it all pointed to the same conclusion that had been drilled into Mitchell's consciousness through years of working with police canines. Scout had caught the scent of methamphetamine. Mitchell's heart rate accelerated. He was supposed to be on a routine community patrol, walking Scout through the neighborhood to maintain visibility and community relations. Nothing about this patrol was supposed to be investigative. Yet here Scout was, practically vibrating with intensity, his nose trained on something dangerous. Emma watched, completely fascinated, as the German Shepherd whined more intensely, his large paws scratching at the fence. His handler, Officer Mitchell, though Emma didn't know his name, was now staring intently at the house beyond the fence. The family had lived on Maple Ridge Drive for 2 years, and they had exchanged only the most cursory of greetings with their neighbor Foster. He was a quiet man, usually seen only late at night, and most neighbors assumed he simply worked the night shift somewhere. "It's okay, sweetie," called, rushing down from the porch now, her protective instincts overriding her initial alarm. She could see that neither the dog nor the officer posed any threat to her daughter. "Come here to Mommy, honey. Let the police officer handle his dog." But Emma was reluctant to move. The interaction fascinated her in the way that things beyond her comprehension often did. She wanted to understand what was happening, why the dog was so upset, and why the police officer looked so intensely focused on the house that seemed so ordinary from the outside. Officer Mitchell had already shifted into professional mode. His trained eye swept across Foster's property, the closed curtains, the basement window that was sealed shut, the lack of visible activity during daylight hours. Scout's alert combined with this observation created a mental picture that Mitchell recognized with absolute certainty. Something illegal was happening in that house. Scout continued his frantic alert behavior, his whines becoming almost desperate. The dog had been trained for 2 years to recognize the scent of methamphetamine, and his olfactory system was detecting something significant, perhaps even an active laboratory operation. The chemical signature was unmistakable to his powerful nose, which was estimated to be anywhere from 10,000 to 100,000 times more sensitive than a human sense of smell. Finally managed to coax Emma away from the fascinating scene, and the little girl reluctantly abandoned her sand castle to move toward the porch. As she was led away, Emma turned back repeatedly to watch the officer and the strange, serious dog. She didn't understand what was happening, but she sensed it was important. She sensed that something dangerous lurked just beyond the fence, something that Scout knew about and her mother instinctively feared. Officer Mitchell stood at that fence, gripping Scout's leash firmly, his mind already working through the necessary steps: document the alert, contact his supervisor, request a search warrant from a judge. The peaceful afternoon had transformed in mere seconds. What had begun as a routine community patrol had become the beginning of an investigation that would eventually shake the entire neighborhood. Scout whined one final time, his alert crystal clear and unmistakable. Officer James Mitchell knew he had just made the discovery that would change everything, for the neighborhood, for the family, and most significantly, for a brave 4-year-old girl who was about to play a role in delivering justice she couldn't yet comprehend. Officer James Mitchell's mind raced with calculations and protocol as he gripped Scout's leash tightly, the massive German Shepherd still vibrating with alert intensity. He had precisely 17 minutes remaining on his community patrol route, but the discovery Scout had just made rendered all schedules irrelevant. Mitchell's training kicked into overdrive. He had learned through countless hours of instruction that a police dog's alert to narcotics was not something to dismiss or verify independently. It was actionable intelligence that demanded immediate professional response. Mitchell pulled out his radio with his free hand, his fingers slightly trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline spike that accompanies the discovery of significant criminal activity. His voice remained calm and professional, a skill honed through years of law enforcement work. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I have a positive alert from K-9 Scout at 428 Maple Ridge Drive, requesting clearance to contact DEA and initiate warrant procedure." The dispatcher's response crackled back within seconds. "Copy, Unit 47. Stand by for DEA liaison." Mitchell secured Scout in the patrol car's specialized canine compartment, the dog still restless and agitated, his nose working overtime as if he could track the methamphetamine sent through the vehicle walls. Mitchell knew that what Scout had detected wasn't accidental or ambiguous. A trained narcotics dog's alerts were remarkably accurate. Studies showed that well-trained dogs like Scout had a detection accuracy rate exceeding 95% when properly handled. Scout's behavioral signals had been textbook: sustained alert, directed focus, and the characteristic whining that indicated an intense olfactory detection. Within 30 minutes, Special Agent Robert from the Drug Enforcement Administration's Cleveland field office arrived in an unmarked sedan. Was a veteran agent with 15 years of experience investigating methamphetamine operations, and his face was a mask of controlled urgency. Mitchell briefed him on Scout's alert behavior, the location, and his observations of Foster's property. "The dog was absolutely certain," Mitchell explained, gesturing toward the patrol car where Scout could still be seen, his alert posture unwavering. "I've never seen him this intense. His nose was practically glued to that fence line, and he was tracking toward that basement window." Agent nodded, his experienced eyes studying the house across the street. "The behavioral profile fits: night activity, sealed windows, curtains drawn during daylight hours. Combined with your dog's alert, we have probable cause. I can have a judge sign the warrant within the hour. We'll execute the search this evening after dark. Too many civilians out during daylight hours, and we need to ensure tactical safety." The next 4 hours seemed to stretch indefinitely. Mitchell documented everything meticulously: the exact time of Scout's alert, the precise location where the dog had focused his attention, weather conditions, wind direction, and Scout's complete behavioral response. Every detail mattered in a courtroom scenario. Coordinated with the Drug Enforcement Administration's tactical team, and submitted the warrant application to Judge Elizabeth, emphasizing the police dog's alert, the suspicious property characteristics, and the proximity to residential neighborhoods and schools. Judge, having reviewed countless warrant applications during her 20 years on the bench, recognized the strength of the evidence. She signed the warrant at 6:47 p.m., exactly 6 hours after Scout's initial alert. The tactical team assembled at 8:15 p.m., just as darkness settled completely over Maple Ridge. 8 agents in tactical gear, complete with protective equipment and oxygen supplies, prepared for what they knew could be an extremely dangerous situation. Methamphetamine laboratories were notorious for their explosion hazards, chemical toxicity, and the unpredictability of individuals operating within them. At 8:45 p.m., the team breached Foster's front door simultaneously through multiple entry points. They found him in the kitchen, and within seconds, he was restrained and read his Miranda rights. But the real discovery awaited them in the basement. The basement door led down into a scene that resembled a chemical warfare facility more than anything that should exist in a suburban home. The temperature alone was shocking. The basement was approximately 15 degrees hotter than the rest of the house, artificially heated to speed up chemical reactions. The agent's protective equipment fogged immediately from the temperature differential. Lined against one wall were glass beakers and flasks containing various compounds in different stages of processing. The acidic smell was almost overwhelming even through the tactical team's respirators. Burners, hot plates, and a sophisticated heating apparatus created an intricate network of glassware and tubing. Combat Methamphetamine Epidemic Act regulations require careful tracking of pseudoephedrine purchases, so Foster had improvised, manufacturing meth from alternative precursors, a method even more dangerous and volatile than traditional cooking methods. On a workbench sat approximately 4 kilograms of processed methamphetamine, packaged in various quantities for street distribution. Underneath the bench, agents discovered notebooks documenting Foster's production schedule, his customer list, and financial records indicating he was generating approximately $15,000 weekly from this operation. But what struck Agent most forcefully was the proximity. The basement window faced directly toward the family's backyard. The property line was no more than 30 feet away. The chemical fumes permeating the basement could have easily seeped into the neighboring yard through soil and air circulation. The volatile nature of the production process meant that an explosion, a genuine possibility given the unstable chemical reactions and heat sources, would have devastated not just Foster's house, but potentially the residents as well. That 4-year-old Emma, who had been playing in her sandbox just hours earlier, had been in genuine danger. Not merely abstract danger, but concrete, immediate peril. Had Foster's operation experienced an explosion, children could have died. Toxic chemical exposure could have caused lifelong neurological damage. Scout's alert, realized, had potentially prevented a tragedy of immeasurable proportions. As forensic specialists photographed and every element of the lab stepped outside and called Mitchell, "The dog was right," said simply. "This is a major operation. We're looking at felony manufacturing charges, distribution with intent, endangering minors, the whole package, and the proximity to residential areas, especially to children." Didn't need to finish the sentence. Mitchell understood. Foster was read a full list of charges: manufacturing methamphetamine, possession with intent to distribute, operating a dangerous chemical laboratory, child endangerment, and violations of the Combat Methamphetamine Epidemic Act. Federal charges would be added the following morning. As the evening progressed and the laboratory was systematically dismantled, news of the discovery began circulating through the neighborhood. Parents who had allowed their children to play in nearby yards just hours earlier learned of the toxic facility operating mere feet away. The family was informed by a sympathetic agent that their daughter had likely been in proximity to dangerous chemical fumes multiple times during her outdoor play. Michael and held each other, their faces pale with the terrifying realization of how close they had come to losing their daughter. If Scout hadn't alerted, if Officer Mitchell hadn't responded professionally, if the warrant had been delayed even a single day, Scout had given them a second chance at life. By midnight, Foster was secured in the Franklin County Jail, facing charges that would likely result in substantial prison time. The basement laboratory was being safely decontaminated by specialists, and in the house, a 4-year-old girl slept peacefully, completely unaware that a brave German shepherd had protected her that afternoon, a protection that would lead to something even more significant in the days ahead. The Franklin County Courthouse stood as an imposing structure of gray stone and marble, a monument to justice that had witnessed countless trials over its 80-year history. Foster sat in the holding cell on the basement level, his demeanor completely transformed from the terrified suspect arrested 3 weeks earlier. The initial shock had worn away, replaced by something far more dangerous: calculated confidence. Foster's public defender had been quickly replaced by David, a high-powered criminal defense attorney who had earned a reputation throughout Ohio's legal community as a master of technicalities and procedural loopholes. Was 63 years old, with silver hair perfectly coiffed and an immaculate suit that likely cost more than most people earned in a month. He had successfully defended 17 clients charged with drug manufacturing in the past decade, and his track record of getting cases dismissed on procedural grounds was legendary. At a preliminary hearing 3 weeks prior, Foster had heard his initial assessment, and it had transformed his outlook completely. "The dog," had said confidently, leaning back in his chair in the consultation room with his fingers steepled together. "That's their entire case. A German shepherd's alert, nothing more. No independent verification, no direct observation of the alleged laboratory operation, just a dog's nose, and I can dismantle that entire foundation with the right legal strategy." Now, sitting in the courtroom on a gray Tuesday morning in June, Foster watched his attorney rise to his feet with the confidence of a man who had done this countless times before. The preliminary hearing for the suppression motion had attracted minimal media attention, just a few local news reporters and a court clerk recording the proceedings. Judge, a stern woman in her 60s with decades of judicial experience, sat elevated on the bench, regarding both attorneys with the studied neutrality that characterized her courtroom. Judge had earned her position through meticulous attention to legal procedure and constitutional rights, and she would not tolerate shortcuts from either the prosecution or the defense. Assistant District Attorney stood to present the prosecution's case. Was 47, with 15 years of experience in the District Attorney's office and a conviction rate that placed her among the top 5 prosecutors in Franklin County. She believed absolutely in the legitimacy of the evidence against Foster. Yet she understood that this was the critical juncture. If Judge granted suppression motion and excluded the dog's alert from evidence, the entire case would collapse like a house of cards. His opening argument was delivered with theatrical precision. Your Honor, the evidence against my client is built upon nothing more substantial than the subjective interpretation of an animal's behavior. A dog cannot testify. A dog cannot explain what prompted its alert. A dog cannot distinguish between a genuine detection and a false alert triggered by any number of stimuli. We are asking this court to convict a United States citizen of serious federal charges based on the wagging of a tail and the whine of an animal. This is not justice. This is conjecture elevated to the status of evidence. He paused dramatically, allowing his words to settle over the courtroom. Furthermore, continued, there exists no independent verification of what the dog allegedly detected. No forensic testing was conducted at the property line where the dog supposedly indicated. No air samples were analyzed from that location. The entirety of the arrest was predicated on a single officer's subjective assessment of an animal's behavioral response. With respect, Your Honor, this fails to meet the constitutional threshold for probable cause. Felt her jaw tighten. Was using a sophisticated legal argument that, while technically flawed in her opinion, was precisely the kind of technicality that judges sometimes embraced. She had seen it happen before, cases dismissed on grounds that seemed to prioritize procedure over substantive guilt. Officer James Mitchell was called to testify about Scout's training and behavior. Cross-examination was relentless and surgical. Officer Mitchell, in your experience, how many times has Scout alerted to something that turned out to be innocuous? A strong spice in a kitchen, an old chemical residue on clothing, cleaning supplies stored in a basement. Mitchell answered carefully, but had planted seeds of doubt. Scout has a 95% accuracy rate in controlled studies, Mitchell replied. 95%, repeated, allowing the slight error margin to hang in the air like an accusation. So 5% of the time, Scout alerts to something that isn't actually methamphetamine. That's 1 in 20. In a neighborhood with 60 homes, all containing various chemicals and compounds, it seems quite possible that Scout's alert could have been triggered by something entirely innocent. The argument was technically dishonest. Scout's alert combined with the other evidence had justified the warrant, but it cast reasonable doubt in the minds of observers. Judge maintained her neutral expression, but could see her taking notes, actually considering arguments. Foster watched the proceedings with increasing confidence. He understood nothing of the legal nuances, but he could read the room. He could see that was effectively challenging the foundation of the prosecution's case. Foster actually smiled at one point, causing Judge to shoot him a warning glance. The prosecution presented its case methodically. The chemical laboratory was undeniable, physical evidence that could not be explained away. The 4 kilograms of processed methamphetamine existed, tangible and irrefutable. The documentation of Foster's production schedule and customer list painted a clear picture of criminal enterprise. But suppression motion attacked the legality of how the evidence had been obtained. If the search warrant had been issued based on insufficient probable cause, then everything discovered during that search would be fruit of the poisonous tree inadmissible in court. The dog's alert does not constitute sufficient probable cause, argued forcefully in his closing statement. It is hearsay of the highest order. An animal cannot be cross-examined. An animal cannot explain its reasoning. And most importantly, Your Honor, the Constitution protects citizens from unreasonable searches and seizures based on nothing more than the behavioral response of a canine. Judge called for a recess. She would rule on the suppression motion within 48 hours. In the holding cell afterward, visited his client with a satisfied expression. "It's working perfectly," he said. "Is considering granting the suppression motion. If she excludes the dog's alert and the search based on it, the entire case falls apart. They have nothing without that initial detection." Foster felt genuine relief wash over him for the first time since his arrest. Had cost him $40,000 in legal fees so far, but it appeared to be money well spent. Within days, he might be walking free. The methamphetamine operation, the proximity to children, the danger he had created, all of it would become irrelevant due to a legal technicality. Meanwhile, sat in her office, reviewing case files and wondering how to salvage the prosecution. The physical evidence was strong, but was right about one thing. Without the initial probable cause provided by Scout's alert, the search warrant itself became legally vulnerable. She needed something more. She needed corroborating evidence that would exist independently of the dog's alert. She pulled out her notes from the initial interviews. There was something there, something she had initially dismissed as background information. Something about a 4-year-old girl who had mentioned seeing the bad man doing strange things. His eyes widened. It was unconventional, nearly unprecedented, but it might be the only way to save this case. She picked up her phone and called the family. It was a Thursday evening, 3 days after Foster's arrest. The household had settled into the quiet routine of early bedtime preparations. Emma sat curled in her favorite oversized chair in the living room, a cushioned recliner that seemed to swallow her small frame entirely. She wore flannel pajamas decorated with cartoon puppies, her dark curly hair freshly washed and still damp from her bath. Her mother sat beside her, a large picture book open between them. Had been reading aloud, something about a princess and a magical forest, but Emma seemed restless, her usual enthusiastic engagement with the story notably absent. Her eyes kept drifting away from the colorful illustrations, and she occasionally twisted a strand of her hair around her finger, a telltale sign that something occupied her thoughts. "Emma, sweetie, do you want me to keep reading?" asked, noticing her daughter's distraction. Emma didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared out the window into the darkness beyond, her small face illuminated by the soft glow of the living room lamp. Outside, the neighborhood was silent and peaceful, the way suburban Ohio communities typically were on Thursday evenings. Neighbors had retreated behind their front doors, families gathered around dinner tables or television sets. Then, almost as if a dam had broken, Emma suddenly turned to her mother with an intensity that seemed far beyond her 4 years. "Mommy," she said quietly, "the bad man was outside again last night." His hand froze on the page she had been about to turn. Something in Emma's voice, a seriousness that contrasted sharply with her typical childish prattling, sent a chill down her spine. "What bad man, honey? What do you mean?" "The man from the house," Emma said matter-of-factly, as if this should be obvious. "The one by the fence, the one Scout was barking at." Set the book aside carefully, her full attention now focused on her daughter. She had been carefully shielding Emma from the details of Foster's arrest, not wanting to frighten her. She and Michael had discussed keeping the incident vague, simply explaining that the police had found something dangerous at the neighbor's house, and that it was all being handled by grown-ups. They certainly hadn't expected Emma to have formed memories detailed enough to discuss the incident unprompted. "Tell me what you saw," Emma said, keeping her voice calm despite the growing urgency she felt. "Tell Mommy everything you remember." Emma's eyes narrowed in concentration, as if she were accessing files stored in her young mind. "I saw him at nighttime, Mommy. It was dark outside and you were sleeping. He came out of his door and he had boxes. Big boxes like the ones from the grocery store." Leaned forward slightly, encouraging Emma to continue. "What did he do with the boxes?" "He put them in his car," Emma said, gesturing with her small hands in a manner that suggested lifting something heavy. "He was very quiet, like he was trying to be sneaky. He looked around a lot like he was checking if anybody could see him." The specificity was shocking. Had assumed Emma's memories would be vague, childish impressions, disjointed fragments that barely formed coherent narratives. Instead, her daughter was describing a scene with clarity and detail that seemed impossible for a 4-year-old. "When did you see this, sweetheart?" asked carefully. "Do you remember what day it was?" Emma scrunched up her face, her tongue poking out slightly as she thought hard. Then she stood up and walked to the calendar hanging on the refrigerator in the kitchen, her mother following close behind. Emma pointed at a square on the calendar. "It was when we went to the park with Grandma, the day we had hot dogs for lunch." Checked the calendar, her pulse accelerating. Emma was pointing at Tuesday of the previous week, which aligned exactly with one of the dates Officer Mitchell had documented as a suspicious evening, when neighbors had reported unusual activity at Foster's property. "What else do you remember, Emma?" His voice was slightly strained now, her maternal protective instincts warring with her growing conviction that her daughter might possess crucial information. "He poured stuff," Emma continued, as if reading from a prepared statement. "Red stuff. It went down the drain in the ground, the drain outside his house." Felt her breath catch. The storm drain. Emma had described Foster disposing of material down the storm drain system, behavior consistent with someone attempting to dispose of evidence or chemical byproducts from a methamphetamine laboratory. "Did you see this yourself, baby, or did someone tell you about it?" "I saw it," Emma said firmly. "I was looking out my window, my bedroom window, because I heard the loud noises." "What loud noises?" "Like mechanical noises," Emma said, struggling slightly to articulate what she had heard. "Like when Daddy uses his electric drill, but louder and different, and I smelled something bad. Really bad, Mommy. It made my nose hurt a little." His hands were trembling now. Emma was describing the sound of laboratory equipment, likely the ventilation system Foster had rigged in his basement, and the distinctive chemical smell of methamphetamine production. The fact that the smell had been strong enough to reach Emma's upstairs bedroom, through closed windows and walls, underscored the magnitude of the operation. "Did you tell anybody else about this, Emma?" Emma nodded solemnly. "I told Miss at school. I told her about the house and the bad man. I told her it smelled like." Immediately understood. Miss was Emma's kindergarten teacher at Maple Ridge Elementary School. Over the previous 3 weeks, as the shock of Foster's arrest had worn off, had mentioned to the teacher in passing that there had been some police activity in the neighborhood, and that Emma might ask questions. She had never imagined that Emma had already provided detailed information to her teacher. That evening, after Emma had finally fallen asleep, called the school and requested Miss' personal contact information. When she reached the teacher at home, Miss' response confirmed growing certainty. "Oh yes, Emma mentioned something about it several weeks ago," Miss said, her voice tinged with concern. "I remember specifically because she used that phrase house, and she was quite detailed about seeing someone doing something sneaky at nighttime. I made a note of it in our parent-teacher conference notes because I wanted to follow up with you about it, but then I saw the police activity, and I assumed the situation had been addressed." His mind was racing. She had documentary evidence that Emma had mentioned these details weeks before Foster's arrest, before she could possibly have been coached or influenced by anyone. She hung up with Miss and immediately called the prosecutor's office, requesting an urgent meeting with Assistant District Attorney. The next morning, sat across from Emma in a small consultation room at the district attorney's office. Emma swung her legs nervously in the oversized chair, unsure why she was being talked to by a serious-looking woman in professional clothing. "Emma, can you tell me again what you told your mommy about the man next door?" asked gently, keeping her voice light and unthreatening. Emma recounted the story again, adding details she hadn't mentioned to her mother: the color of the man's car, the approximate time she had seen him. She indicated it was when Pig was over on television, which helped establish an approximate time window, and her distinct memory of the chemical smell. After Emma left the office, sat in stunned silence. She had just interviewed the most unexpected witness of her legal career, a 4-year-old girl whose testimony was not only detailed but appeared credible, corroborated by independent documentation from her kindergarten teacher, and most remarkably, untainted by any knowledge of the subsequent police investigation. Immediately scheduled a meeting with Judge Chambers to discuss the possibility of an unprecedented legal move, calling a 4-year-old to testify in a serious criminal case. Judge listened to his proposal with a furrowed brow. "This is highly irregular," she said slowly. "I've been on the bench for 22 years, and I cannot recall a case where a child this young was called as a primary witness in a felony drug manufacturing trial." "I understand, Your Honor," replied. "But Emma's testimony could provide the independent corroboration we need. Her observations predate the search warrant. She describes things: the chemical smell, the disposal of materials, the equipment sounds, that she couldn't possibly know about unless she had actually witnessed them. Her account is detailed, specific, and documented independently by her kindergarten teacher weeks before Foster's arrest." Judge leaned back in her chair, contemplating the precedent she would be setting. Finally, she nodded. "We'll proceed carefully, but first, we need a child psychologist to evaluate whether Emma can testify competently and whether such testimony would be traumatic for her. Let's not move forward until we're absolutely certain this is in her best interest." The pieces were falling into place. Scout had provided the initial alert. The physical evidence had corroborated it. And now, a 4-year-old girl, speaking the simple, honest truth, was about to become the prosecution's most powerful weapon against a dangerous criminal who had nearly escaped justice on a technicality. Dr. Sarah's office at the Children's Advocacy Center looked nothing like a typical clinical space. Soft pastel walls painted in calming shades of blue and green surrounded comfortable seating areas. Shelves held an extensive collection of children's books, building blocks, dolls, and therapeutic toys. Warm lighting from table lamps created an atmosphere more reminiscent of a child's bedroom than a professional evaluation space. This design was intentional. Doctor had spent 15 years specializing in child psychology and trauma-informed interviewing techniques, and she understood that children performed best in environments that felt safe and non-threatening. Emma sat on a cushioned carpet, surrounded by dolls and figurines, while Doctor sat nearby at her level, speaking in a gentle, conversational tone, and Michael sat in chairs slightly back from the play area, observing but not interfering. This was the 4th session over 2 weeks, and the atmosphere had gradually shifted from Emma's initial wariness to growing comfort. "Emma, I want to talk to you about something important," Doctor said, holding up a collection of dolls. "Do you see these people? This one is a police officer. This one is a judge. This one is a person who did something wrong. Do you understand what that means?" Emma nodded seriously, picking up the judge doll with its tiny black robe. "Like the bad man." "Exactly like the bad man," Doctor confirmed. "The judge helps decide if the bad man did something wrong, and sometimes the judge needs to hear from people who saw what happened. That's called telling the truth. Have you heard that phrase before?" "Yes," Emma said. "Mommy and Daddy say I always have to tell the truth." Doctor smiled warmly. That's very important. Now, what if I told you that the judge wants to hear from you, wants to hear what you saw at the bad man's house? How would that make you feel? Emma's small face grew serious, her expression becoming contemplative in a way that seemed far too mature for a 4-year-old. Would the bad man be there? This was the critical question, the one that revealed Emma's underlying anxiety. Doctor had anticipated it. Yes, the bad man would be there, but he would be sitting very far away from you, and there would be police officers there to keep everyone safe. You would sit in a special chair that's higher up so everyone can see and hear you. And I would be there, and your mommy and daddy would be nearby. You wouldn't be alone. Over the following sessions, Doctor employed evidence-based techniques for preparing child witnesses. She used anatomically correct dolls to help Emma articulate what she had observed without requiring verbalization of potentially inappropriate details. She created a mock courtroom setup in her office, with chairs arranged to simulate the actual layout Emma would experience. She explained the concept of telling the truth in terms a 4-year-old could comprehend. The truth is when you tell what really happened, Doctor explained. Not what you wish happened, not what someone told you happened, but what your own eyes and nose and ears told you. Do you understand? Emma nodded, then asked a question that revealed the sophistication of her understanding. What if I forget something? Is that bad? Not at all, Doctor assured her. Your brain is very smart, but sometimes memories fade a little. It's okay to say, I don't remember if you're not sure. That's still telling the truth. Doctor's formal evaluation report, completed 3 weeks into the preparation process, was nuanced and carefully worded. She concluded that Emma possessed sufficient cognitive capability to testify competently, that she understood the distinction between truth and falsehood, and that she could communicate her observations with remarkable clarity. However, Doctor also noted significant concerns about the potential psychological impact of courtroom testimony on a child this young. While Emma demonstrates exceptional capability for her age, Doctor wrote, I must emphasize that subjecting a 4-year-old to the stress of criminal testimony carries inherent risks to her emotional and psychological development. Careful procedural accommodations will be essential to minimize trauma. The moment filed the motion to allow Emma's testimony, David erupted in fury. He submitted a counter-motion that was essentially a legal attack on the entire concept of child testimony in criminal proceedings. This is a travesty, his motion declared. The prosecution seeks to place a 4-year-old child on the stand to testify against my client in a serious felony case. This represents a dangerous precedent that prioritizes conviction over constitutional protections. A child this young cannot possibly provide reliable testimony. Her observations are necessarily filtered through the limited cognitive development of a preschooler. She is susceptible to suggestion, false memory implantation, and coercion, whether intentional or unintentional, from adults around her. Argued that Emma's testimony would violate his client's Sixth Amendment right to confront witnesses. He submitted psychological studies demonstrating that children under 6 had limited capacity for accurate memory formation and were highly susceptible to leading questions and suggestion. He argued that allowing such testimony would create a precedent that would fundamentally undermine the reliability of witness testimony in criminal cases. If we allow prosecutors to put toddlers on the witness stand, argued, we open the door to an era where the most vulnerable and unreliable witnesses provide the foundation for criminal convictions. A flurry of legal briefs followed. Child psychology experts provided competing opinions. Legal scholars debated the constitutional implications. Local media outlets picked up the story, and it became a subject of heated discussion on television talk shows and in legal circles across Ohio. Judge called a hearing specifically dedicated to the question of Emma's and the propriety of her testimony. Both sides presented expert witnesses, Doctor for the prosecution explaining Emma's remarkable ability to recall specific details and maintain chronological accuracy. A defense psychologist that Emma's young age made her inherently unreliable and susceptible to leading questions. The hearing lasted 3 full days. Arguments centered on constitutional rights, psychological research, and the appropriate balance between obtaining justice and protecting vulnerable witnesses. Michael and watched from the gallery, their hands clasped tightly together. They loved their daughter fiercely, and every instinct told them to protect her from the stress of courtroom testimony. Yet they also understood that Foster had created a methamphetamine laboratory 30 feet from their daughter's bedroom, that he represented a genuine danger to the entire neighborhood. They were torn between their protective parental impulses and their sense of civic responsibility. During a break in the hearing, pulled Emma into a quiet corner of the courthouse hallway. "Emma, do you want to tell the judge what you saw?" Emma was quiet for a moment, her small face serious. Then she looked up at her mother and said simply, "The bad man did, I need to tell." That evening, Judge issued her ruling. After extensive deliberation and consultation with multiple experts, she concluded that Emma could testify, but with significant procedural accommodations. The testimony would be limited in scope. Leading questions would be minimized. Emma would be allowed comfort items in the witness box. Her testimony would be videotaped as a backup record. There would be frequent breaks to ensure she remained comfortable. "This court recognizes the extraordinary and precedent-setting nature of this decision," Judge wrote. "However, we also recognize that truth does not discriminate by age. If a witness, regardless of her years, has observed something relevant to establishing guilt or innocence, the law cannot simply exclude her testimony based on her age alone. What we can do, and must do, is ensure that she testifies in a manner that minimizes trauma and maximizes accuracy." Immediately filed an appeal, but it was. The trial date was set for 3 weeks away. Emma began having nightmares. She regressed slightly, becoming clingy with her mother, but she also exhibited remarkable resilience. Doctor continued her sessions, and Emma increasingly seemed to understand that she was going to do something important, something brave. "I'm going to tell the judge the truth about the bad man," Emma said during one session, with a certainty that transcended her 4 years. "So he can't hurt other people." The courtroom was waiting. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Franklin County Courthouse as the gallery filled to capacity. The case had attracted substantial media attention. The prospect of a 4-year-old testifying in a serious drug manufacturing trial was unprecedented enough to draw reporters from news outlets throughout Ohio. Camera crews had set up outside the courthouse, and security was unusually tight. Judge had issued strict orders about media conduct and the prohibition of photographing Emma. Foster sat at the defense table, his expression a carefully maintained mask of indifference. Yet his hands betrayed him. They trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of the table. He had never seen Emma before this moment. She was suddenly real to him, not an abstract concept or a legal problem, but a small human being whose words might destroy him. Emma sat in the hallway outside the courtroom with her mother and Dr. Sarah. She wore a pale lavender dress that had carefully selected, neither too formal nor too casual. It was a dress that made Emma feel pretty and confident, important psychological considerations. Doctor held Emma's hand and sat close, ready to offer reassurance. "Are you ready, Emma?" Doctor asked gently. Emma nodded, her small face serious. "I'm going to tell the truth," she said, as if reciting a mantra she had practiced 100 times. The bailiff appeared at the courtroom door. "The witness may enter." The walk seemed impossibly long too. Emma's small hand clutched Doctor's, her eyes wide as she processed the overwhelming sensory experience of the courtroom. The room was vast, with high ceilings and imposing wood paneling. The jury box held 12 adult faces, all focused intently on the small child entering their space. Judge sat elevated on the bench, her expression stern but not unkind. The bailiff had prepared a special arrangement. Instead of the standard witness box, which would have placed Emma impossibly high and made her disappear behind the wooden rail, a platform had been constructed, essentially a sturdy step stool that elevated her just enough to be visible to the jury while remaining comfortably within view. A cushioned chair sat atop the platform, sized appropriately for a child, with a footrest so her feet wouldn't dangle uncomfortably. Emma climbed onto the platform with Doctor's assistance. Once seated, she was at a height where her face was clearly visible to all observers. The jury could see her entire upper body, her expressions, and her demeanor. Was positioned at the far right of the courtroom, visible to Emma but far enough away to comply with courtroom procedures. The bailiff approached with a children's Bible, specially selected for this proceeding. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" Emma stared at the Bible, then at the bailiff. "I promise to tell the truth," she said clearly in her small but audible voice. "I always tell the truth." Judge smiled slightly, the first softening of her stern expression that observers had witnessed. "Emma, do you understand what that means, to tell the truth?" "Yes," Emma replied. "It means I tell what really happened, what I really saw." "That's exactly right," Judge said. "Now we'll ask you some questions. Just answer what she asks. If you don't understand a question, you can say so and she will ask it in a different way. Do you understand?" "Yes," Emma said confidently. Approached the witness stand slowly, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. She wore a warm smile and kept her voice gentle and conversational, a remarkable contrast to her usual courtroom demeanor. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, studying how expert child interviewers posed questions to ensure maximum clarity while avoiding leading language. "Emma, do you know why you're here today?" "To tell the judge about the bad man," Emma said simply. "That's right, and the bad man's name is Foster. Do you see him in this room?" Emma's eyes scanned the courtroom and landed on the defense table. She pointed directly at Foster. "That's him. That's the bad man." Foster flinched visibly, gripping the table so hard his knuckles turned white. Guided Emma through the foundational questions, her name, her age, where she lived. Emma answered each one clearly and confidently, then moved into the substantive testimony. "Emma, tell me about the night you saw the bad man doing something at his house." Emma's face scrunched in concentration. "He came out of his door. It was dark outside. Nobody else was awake. I was looking out my window because I heard loud noises." "What kind of loud noises?" "Like machines," Emma said. "Like when Daddy uses his electric drill, but different, louder." "And what did you see?" "The bad man came out and he had boxes, big boxes. He was carrying them to his car. His car was dark-colored. I think it was black or maybe dark blue. He was very careful when he walked, like he was trying to be very quiet." Displayed a series of photographs for Emma to examine, various items found in Foster's laboratory, his vehicle, his driveway. Emma identified them accurately. "That looks like the boxes," she pointed. "That looks like his car." "Emma, do you remember what happened next?" Emma nodded. "He got something from somewhere, something in a container. It was red. He poured it down the drain that goes into the ground outside his house." "And did you see him do this, Emma, with your own eyes?" "Yes," Emma said firmly. "I was watching from my window." "How did the red stuff make you feel?" Emma's nose wrinkled in disgust. "It smelled bad, really bad. It made my nose hurt. It was in smell." The jury was completely silent, absorbed in Emma's testimony. Several jurors leaned forward slightly, their entire attention focused on the small child in the witness box. Showed Emma a set of drawings prepared by a court-appointed artist. Emma had worked with the artist to create visual representations of what she had witnessed. The drawings were crude but unmistakably illustrated a person pouring liquid into a drain, another person carrying boxes to a vehicle, and various other details Emma had described. "Did you help make these drawings, Emma?" "Yes," Emma confirmed. "I told the artist what I saw and she drawed it." "And are these drawings accurate? Do they show what you really saw?" "Yes," Emma said solemnly. "That's what the bad man did." Then employed one final technique. She placed an array of dates on cards in front of Emma, various days written in simple terms with accompanying images of television shows and family activities. Emma had to identify which date corresponded to her observation. "Emma, when you saw the bad man with the boxes and the red liquid, what was happening on TV?" "Pig was on," Emma said immediately. "It was after Pig finished, so it was late." The prosecution had television schedules, and Pig aired at precisely 8:00 p.m. on weekday afternoons. Emma's reference to it being after Pig aligned with the timestamp Foster's neighbors had reported seeing suspicious activity. After 2 hours of testimony concluded her examination. Judge called for a 15-minute recess before David would begin his cross-examination. Time for Emma to rest, to use the bathroom, to receive reassurance from doctor and her mother. The jury members exchanged glances. Several had tears in their eyes. Emma had been remarkable, not just competent but compelling. Her testimony was detailed, internally consistent, and delivered with an innocence and certainty that was nearly impossible to dismiss as fabrication or coaching. In the hallway during the recess held Emma tightly. "You did so good, baby. I'm so proud of you." Emma looked up, her small face showing signs of fatigue. "Is the bad man going to go to jail now?" "We'll see," said carefully. "The judge and the jury get to decide, but you told the truth and that's what matters." David sat in a small consultation room with Foster, his previously confident demeanor significantly diminished. "We have a problem," said quietly. "That child just destroyed our defense. She was articulate, she was detailed, and most importantly, she was credible. The jury believed her." "Can you break her down on cross-examination?" Foster asked desperately. Shook his head slowly. "Cross-examining a 4-year-old who just accurately about your crimes is a losing proposition. Attack her and I look like a monster. Agree with her testimony and we lose the case. Either way, the jury has heard the truth from the most sympathetic witness imaginable." Outside the courtroom, reporters crowded against the security barriers, their cameras clicking frantically as Emma emerged, holding her mother's hand. She looked small and tired, but also somehow stronger, a child who had accomplished something extraordinary. The testimony had changed everything. The afternoon session of Emma's trial reconvened after a 2-hour lunch break. The courtroom had filled again with spectators, journalists, and the curious members of the public who had been following the unprecedented case. David had conducted a cautious cross-examination of Emma that morning, deliberately avoiding any aggressive questioning that might alienate the jury. His strategy was clear. Don't attack the child, but gently suggest that her observations might be subject to alternative interpretations. "Emma, you said you saw boxes," had asked during cross-examination. "Are you absolutely certain those boxes came from the bad man's house? Could they have come from a neighbor's yard? Could someone else have put them in the car?" Emma had considered the questions carefully, her young brow furrowed in concentration. "No," she had said with certainty. "He came out of his door with them, out of the bad man's door. That's where they came from." Had continued with similar attempts to introduce doubt, but Emma's testimony had remained consistent and unshakable. The jury had watched the entire exchange with evident sympathy for Emma and growing frustration with attempts to undermine a child who was simply telling what she had witnessed. Now, as the afternoon session began, stood to present her final evidence. She had spent the entire lunch break coordinating with Officer James Mitchell and preparing for a motion that was legally unconventional and strategically brilliant. "Your Honor," said, rising to her feet, The prosecution requests permission to present demonstrative evidence that corroborates the witness Emma's testimony. We would like to introduce K9 Scout, the police dog whose initial alert led to the discovery of the methamphetamine laboratory. Judge's eyebrows rose. She had anticipated many possibilities during this trial, but this was something altogether unexpected. Ms., explain your legal theory for introducing a dog into these proceedings. Your Honor, Scout's presence serves multiple purposes, explained carefully. First, Scout's initial alert provided the probable cause for the warrant that led to the discovery of the laboratory, evidence that is not disputed and demonstrates that narcotics were indeed present at the defendant's residence. Second, Scout's recognition of the child witness will serve as corroboration of her credibility. Scout was present during the initial alert at the property line, and Emma was observing from her yard. Their previous proximity to the same criminal activity creates a factual nexus that validates the child's observations. David jumped to his feet, his face reddening. Your Honor, this is a gimmick, a publicity stunt. We cannot allow the jury to be influenced by a dog's reaction to a child. This is pure emotionalism designed to manipulate the jury's sympathies. It's not a gimmick, countered firmly. K9 Scout's alert initiated the entire investigation. His presence here demonstrates that the source of contamination, the methamphetamine laboratory, was indeed located at the defendant's residence. The dog's recognition of Emma is simply a matter of factual record. Judge considered both arguments carefully, her judicial demeanor thoughtful. She understood that what was proposing was legally murky territory, yet she also understood that Scout had been central to the entire case from its inception. After several minutes of contemplation, she nodded. I'll allow it, Judge ruled. However, the dog will be restrained, muzzled if necessary, and will remain under complete control. This is corroborating evidence, not a performance. The jury will be instructed that they are to consider the dog's presence only as it relates to confirming the presence of narcotics at the defendant's residence and the proximity of the witness to the crime scene. Officer James Mitchell, who had been waiting in the courthouse hallway with Scout, received the signal to bring the dog to the courtroom. Scout was groomed immaculately, his black and tan coat gleaming. He wore his official police harness, which had been specially fitted and was easily recognizable as law enforcement equipment. A muzzle had been fitted loosely, enough to comply with safety regulations, but not so tight that it appeared cruel or frightening. As Mitchell led Scout into the courtroom, the entire room seemed to shift. The massive German Shepherd was impossible to ignore. His presence commanded attention, and several jurors immediately leaned forward. Foster's face went pale, and his hands gripped the defense table with white-knuckled intensity. But the most dramatic reaction came from Emma. The moment Scout entered the courtroom, Emma's face transformed completely. Her eyes widened, her small mouth opened in an expression of delighted recognition, and she actually stood up slightly in her chair, her entire body animated by a joy that had been absent during her testimony. Scout, Scout, the good doggy, Emma called out, her voice filled with genuine happiness and excitement. The entire courtroom held its breath. Judge had anticipated this possibility, and while it was emotionally charged, it was also powerful evidence. Scout immediately recognized Emma, his tail beginning to wag despite his training to remain neutral during official duties. The connection between the child and the dog was undeniable. Officer Mitchell brought Scout closer to the witness stand, keeping the dog on a tight leash. Scout pulled gently toward Emma, his entire body oriented in her direction. Emma reached out her small hand, and Scout's nose touched her fingers in a gentle greeting. Seized the moment with brilliant courtroom strategy. Emma, do you know this dog? It's Scout, Emma said jubilantly. Scout is the good doggy. Scout knew the bad man was doing. Tell the jury what you mean, Emma. Tell them how Scout knew about the bad man. Emma's next words seemed to flow from her with a natural clarity that transcended her 4 years. She spoke to Scout as if the dog were her confidant, as if she were sharing secrets with an old friend. "Scout came to my yard and he was worried," Emma explained, gesturing animatedly at the dog. "Scout was smelling from the bad man's house. Scout knew something bad was happening. Scout was trying to tell the police officer that the bad man was doing something very wrong. And then the police officer listened to Scout, and he found the bad things in the bad man's house. Scout is so smart. Scout helped keep people safe." The jury watched transfixed. Several jurors had tears streaming down their faces. The connection between Emma and Scout, the validation of her observations through the dog's recognition and affection, created a narrative of truth that was almost impossible to dismiss. David sat frozen at the defense table, realizing that the case had fundamentally shifted. He could cross-examine a 4-year-old only so effectively before alienating the jury, but attacking a police dog's recognition of a child, that would be social and legal suicide. Let the moment linger for a few more seconds, then gently concluded the interaction. "Thank you, Emma. Officer Mitchell, would you please take Scout back?" As Mitchell led Scout from the courtroom, the dog turned back toward Emma repeatedly, as if reluctant to leave. Emma watched him go, waving goodbye. The jury's eyes followed Scout, then returned to Emma, then to Foster, their judgment crystallizing with each second. Judge called for a 15-minute recess. In the jury room, the reaction was unanimous. The jury forewoman later revealed that after Scout's appearance and Emma's testimony about the dog's alert, the jury had essentially reached its verdict. The remaining testimony and closing arguments would be formalities. They had heard the truth from an innocent child. They had witnessed a dog's recognition validating that truth, and they had seen a dangerous criminal attempting to evade justice on technicalities. Foster sat in the holding cell, his attorney by his side. "We're finished," said quietly. "That child and that dog just convicted you. The jury believes her completely, and now they've seen the dog that alerted to your laboratory. They understand the entire chain of evidence. The verdict is going to be guilty on all counts." Foster's face crumbled, the mask of confidence finally shattering. He had almost escaped on legal technicalities. He had nearly won by exploiting a procedural vulnerability. But a 4-year-old girl and a police dog had bridged the gap, creating a narrative of truth that no legal argument could overcome. Scout had shown the jury that Emma was right, and Emma had shown them that Scout was right. Together, they had revealed a dangerous criminal who had endangered an entire neighborhood of children. The jury deliberation lasted 6 hours and 42 minutes. In the jury room, the 12 men and women sat around a wooden table in an atmosphere of quiet determination. They had reviewed the evidence methodically. The physical laboratory equipment, the processed methamphetamine, the chemical analysis confirming production methods, the financial records documenting drug sales, and most compellingly, Emma's testimony corroborated by Scout's alert and her own observations. The jury forewoman, a retired teacher named who had worked with children for 43 years, held the vote. All in favor of guilty on count 1, manufacturing methamphetamine. 12 hands rose immediately. Count 2, possession with intent to distribute. 12 hands. Count 3, operating a dangerous chemical laboratory in proximity to residential areas. 12 hands. Count 4, child endangerment. 12 hands again, every single verdict unanimous on every charge. When the jury filed back into the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Judge sat elevated on the bench, her expression carefully neutral. Foster stood for the reading of the verdict, his face ashen, his body appearing to have physically diminished over the course of the trial. "On count 1, manufacturing methamphetamine, how do you find the defendant?" the court clerk asked. "Guilty," the jury forewoman responded. The word hung in the courtroom like a pronouncement of fate. 3 more guilty verdicts followed in rapid succession. Foster's knees actually buckled slightly. David placed a steadying hand on his client's arm, his own expression grim. The defense attorney had known this was coming, but knowing and experiencing were entirely different phenomena. In the gallery held Emma's hand. Emma didn't fully understand what guilty meant, but she could read her mother's expression and understand that something significant had occurred. Michael put his arm around both of them, and tears ran quietly down his face, not from sadness, but from relief and vindication. The courtroom erupted in muffled applause before Judge Stern gaze silenced it. "Order," she commanded, though her voice contained a note of understanding. "We will proceed to sentencing." 2 weeks later, sentencing occurred before a packed courtroom. Emma was not present. Judge had determined that the child had contributed enough to these proceedings, but her impact was undeniable in every moment. Foster stood before the bench, his expression empty and resigned. His attorney had filed sentencing memorandums requesting leniency, arguing that Foster had no prior criminal history and that the operation, while serious, had not resulted in direct harm to anyone. Stood to present the prosecution's sentencing recommendation. "Your Honor, Foster created a ticking time bomb in a residential neighborhood. His methamphetamine laboratory was positioned 30 feet from a home where a 4-year-old child played daily. The chemical processes he employed were volatile and unstable. An explosion would have devastated multiple homes, potentially killing or permanently injuring the children who played in nearby yards." Gestured toward the evidence photographs displayed on screens showing the hazardous conditions of the laboratory. "Your Honor, this defendant's callous disregard for human life, particularly for children, warrants substantial incarceration to protect the public and demonstrate that such conduct will not be tolerated." Judge reviewed the investigation report, the psychological evaluations, and the victim impact statements. The neighborhood residents had submitted statements describing their fear, their horror at learning how close danger had been, and their gratitude for the law enforcement response. "Foster," Judge began, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority, "you have been convicted of manufacturing methamphetamine, possession with intent to distribute, operating a dangerous chemical laboratory in proximity to residential areas, and child endangerment. These are serious crimes that endanger not only individuals but entire communities." She paused, her eyes fixed on Foster. The evidence presented at trial revealed not merely criminal enterprise, but reckless endangerment of the most vulnerable members of our society, children. "Your operation created risks that could have resulted in explosions, toxic chemical exposure, and loss of life. That these catastrophic outcomes did not occur is a matter of profound good fortune, not evidence of responsible conduct." Judge sentenced Foster to 8 years in federal prison on the manufacturing charge, with concurrent sentences on the other counts. It was a substantial sentence, though not the maximum possible. The judge was careful to balance accountability with proportionality, creating a precedent that would be studied in law schools. "Furthermore," Judge added, "I am imposing a 20-year restriction on your residence within 1 mile of any school, park, or residential neighborhood where children under 18 reside. You will be subject to lifetime probation following your release." As Foster was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, the weight of his consequence finally seemed to register on his face. He would spend the next 8 years in federal prison, and even after his release, his life would be permanently circumscribed by restrictions and monitoring. In the weeks following the verdict, the case became the subject of intense legal analysis. Law schools across the country began teaching the case as an example of precedent-setting child testimony in criminal proceedings. Judge carefully crafted ruling, permitting Emma's testimony while establishing strict procedural protections, became a model for other jurisdictions grappling with similar situations. The American Academy of Child Psychologists published a comprehensive analysis of Emma's testimony and the protocols developed for her participation. Dr. Sarah was invited to speak at national conferences about trauma-informed approaches to child witness preparation. Most remarkably, the Ohio legislature began drafting legislation, ultimately passed as the Child Witness Protection and Testimony Act, that established specific protocols for cases involving child witnesses. The legislation created specialized courtroom arrangements, mandatory psychological evaluations, and procedural protections derived directly from Emma's case. Emma herself became an unlikely celebrity. Magazine articles featured her story, though her parents were careful to limit media exposure and protect her privacy. She received letters from children across the country who were inspired by her bravery. Several major children's organizations began plans for an animated short film depicting a version of her story, the brave girl and the police dog who worked together to keep their neighborhood safe. Scout received formal recognition from the Police Canine Association, along with a special commendation medal presented at a public ceremony. Officer James Mitchell was promoted to the K-9 Unit's Training Division, where he began developing enhanced protocols for community policing applications of police dogs. Judge continued her judicial service, but the case had elevated her profile substantially. She received invitations to speak at national judicial conferences and was eventually appointed to the Ohio Court of Appeals, where she continued to advocate for careful balance between justice and procedural protections for vulnerable witnesses. The neighborhood changed too. Parents who had learned how close they had come to catastrophe became passionate advocates for chemical monitoring and stricter regulations on residential chemical operations. A community fund was established to help other neighborhoods identify and report suspected drug laboratories. The family's house, rather than becoming a source of trauma, became a symbol of community resilience and courage. Emma, now approaching 5 years old as the case concluded, began kindergarten in the fall following the trial. Her teachers reported that she was a cheerful, well-adjusted child who seemed remarkably unburdened by her unique experience. In her classroom, she made friends easily and showed particular affection for the class goldfish and the visiting therapy dog that the school brought in monthly. When asked about her experience testifying, Emma typically responded with simple honesty. "I told the judge what I saw. The bad man did, and I told the truth about it." That was the entire matter as Emma understood it. The simple truth told by a child, facilitated by a dog's nose and a judge's wisdom. But the implications were far broader. Emma had demonstrated that age was not necessarily a barrier to credible testimony. A 4-year-old could observe, remember, and communicate truth with remarkable clarity. Scout had validated that observation through his trained response, and together, they had reminded the legal system that justice sometimes requires flexibility, innovation, and willingness to listen to unexpected voices. Foster sat in his federal prison cell, knowing that his criminal enterprise had been brought down not by sophisticated surveillance or complex investigation, but by a child's honest observations and a dog's extraordinary nose. The case of United States v. Foster would be remembered for decades, not as a dramatic courtroom battle between clever attorneys, but as a reminder that truth, sometimes, simply needs to be heard. And sometimes that truth comes from the most unexpected sources: a child who saw what she saw, and a dog who knew what he knew. Justice had prevailed, not through legal technicalities or sophisticated argument, but through courage, honesty, and the remarkable bond between a small girl and a German shepherd who had both borne witness to wrongdoing and refused to let it pass unaddressed.